I'm, of course, extremely grateful for the chance to share some of my thoughts on risk and on why it's a good thing and why, generally speaking, we get it wrong. I'm not an academic expert, but I was in the army for a very long time, and I've made my living for the last 17-odd years since I left as a commercial security and risk consultant. So while I haven't got papers or letters after my name, except for some silly ones, I've got a certain amount of real-world experience. We'll start by defining some terms. Risk is, in the very sterile sort of academic definition, a threat or a hazard that's been assessed for its impact and its probability. There's a whole body of scientific work and there's a whole body of professional work around what we'll call big R risk. It's the sort of thing you see at banks, insurance companies, major industrials, and it's where very sensitive, very complex mathematics and analytical techniques are applied to very complex arithmetical and statistical analyses in order to derive basically a bet. And that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about small r risk. Risk as it affects us as individuals, how we perceive of risk as individuals, how we perceive of risk as a society, and how things have begun to conspire against us slightly in terms of the quality of the decisions we've been making. And this hooks in to a great extent with what Guy's been talking about, and with some of the individual things that came up in the first session about the impact of stress and about how our personalities as the killer ape that's only just 10,000 years out of the trees is coping with the massive fast-forward pace of a society that's evolving at a logarithmic rate. So, that was page one. I'm the old Guildfordian. I'm the product of this august institution, though I left here a very, very long time ago. And I have to say that I learnt my primary risk management here. The then headmaster, a man of reputation, was a man who understood the concept of risk and who understood the concept of what we little buggers got up to. And he certainly had my number, and he certainly schooled me very carefully and brought to my attention when I'd made some less than fortunate risk management decisions. What I began to grasp then, and what I've grasped completely since, is that the risk management decisions we make, where we are confronted with an unknown position, the closer that position is, or the closer that decision is to something that's ultimately primeval, something that's back in the lizard brain, the more likely we are to make a correct decision, because our instinct and our knowledge are likely to be perfect. And our courage is gradable. We can make sensible decisions. And this goes right back to, you know, if you're in the savannah, which is where we all came from, and there's a lion around, I guarantee you everybody in this room is going to make a sensible decision about whether or not to approach a lion. I will equally guarantee you that other decisions we make, both as individuals and as societies, as become more complicated and more abstruse, more abstracted from those key tribal or Paleolithic verities, will get more and more difficult to do. And this is to do with knowledge, and it's to do with the ability both to understand the context of where we are and the importance of where we are. And the example I'll quote is that of how we respond, both as individuals and as societies, to the two big bogies. What are we most scared of? We're scared of terrorists. Terrorists are terrible. Terrorists present an existential threat to our society. ISIS is going to topple our society tomorrow. We're terrified of paedophilia. We're really worried. We will drive our children to school a mile because of all the predatory roving paedophiles out there. This is not to discount. This is not to say that these things do not go on. Of course they do. This is to say that we have a grotesque overestimate of just how frequent this is. Here's a statistic. You are 10 times more likely to die in the United Kingdom in an accident involving a domestic iron than you are to become a victim of terrorism, either killed or wounded. 10 times more likely. That's consistent. Terrorism is not an existential threat to our society. It was not an existential threat during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. It never has been an existential threat. It's an irritant. It has no strategic significance. The societal impact of terrorism is not the impact of the act itself. It's the impact of the response to it. And the responses we choose as a society to generate to terrorism are based on some false perceptions. Some of these are deliberately false. Some of these are exercised by government for a variety of reasons, perfectly valid reasons. You know, there's nothing malevolent about this. It's not malign. Governments don't sit down and say, what can we do to be nasty and mean today? But it's in response to what they perceive of as public pressure. And that public pressure is often manifested through a very small number of voices on things like Twitter, through the media, and through the people who shout the loudest. And it's also occasioned by extreme risk aversion, because the impact of a terrorist event is profound in media terms. It's profound in reputational terms. If I can be cold and analytical for a moment, and it's just us talking, right? Us and the several million people we hope are going to be watching this on the internet at some point. The actual value of a human life, roughly £1 million. So if you lose 5 or 6 people in a terrorist attack, the human impact is about £5 or £6 million. There may well be infrastructural damage. Let's be pessimistic and let's say about £50 million. If we look at the 7/7 bombings, which are an appalling tragedy and an atrocity, and please don't think that I'm trying to denigrate the experience of either the victims or the gallant people who acted to mitigate the impact, but let's look at it sensibly here. The all-out cost to the nation of the 7/7 bombings was probably of the order of 200 million or so. The cost of the disruption to London and to business and to the even tenor of life, just in the few days afterwards, was in the billions. And the long-term impacts of the restrictions on liberty, the increase in surveillance, and the increased abstraction of the forces of law and order and the security service from other tasks is also significant. Now, in cold risk management terms, that does not fit the cost-benefit calculation, though there are reasons why we chose to do it that way. That's one example. There is a trend or a tendency nowadays, and Guy brought it out, to think about the media as a source of untrustworthy news. There is a lack of trust in the public domain. The fact is that there is a great deal of skepticism now about pretty much everything that happens. We don't trust our media. We don't trust our politicians. We trust our schoolmasters, obviously, because they're thoroughly reliable and jolly good sorts. And we certainly trust our security and risk consultants. Cars are available afterwards. We don't really trust anybody else. And that corroding of trust in the public debate, coupled with a very well-meaning but ultimately negative attempt to set guidelines for how that public debate can be conducted, have led not just to a corrosion of trust and a corrosion of confidence in veracity, but also in the exclusion of large areas of debate, the exclusion of large areas of thought from that public debate. And I'll take here as an example right-wing politics, extreme left-wing politics. You will look in vain for discussion of extreme racist points of view in the media. You will look in vain for open discussion of extreme left-wing, communist, Trotskyist, anarchist, Maoist points of view anywhere but in closed circuits. You will look in vain in our great universities for any discussion of any number of contentious political issues, because there is a perception that there are some things that are just so dangerous, some ideas that are just so bad, that the very mention of them will get people wearing coloured shirts and marching through the streets. This is not just incredibly offensive to the good people of this planet, who are plenty smart enough to recognise a bad idea if they hear one. It's also grotesquely mistaken, because elimination of the debate from the public does not eliminate the debate. Removing the concept from the public debate does not stop the concept being discussed. What happens is that the concept will carry on being discussed. The conversations will go on. The fascists will sit in their corners and they will have their conversations. The extreme left will sit in their corners and have their conversations. The homophobes, the extremely motivated religious types, and they will not be challenged. And as a result, you get, the classic example is Anders Breivik in Norway, a man of extreme right-wing views who had no platform for those views, and as a result, refined them and worked by himself, proceeding from a number of false premises, and built what was overtly a very logical succession of ideas, except, of course, they were based on a single idea, which, in the technical term here, was complete bollocks. But it led him inescapably to the conclusion that what he needed to do was attack the youth of the Norwegian Labour Party and kill loads of them. And he followed that logic through, and he did it, and he's now doing life in an Oslo prison. At no point did anybody have the opportunity to say to him, Anders, this basic idea here, it's bollocks. The other example I always quote is one of the happiest moments I've ever had was on Question Time a couple of years ago. I don't know if you saw it. When Nick Griffin, MEP, was invited on. And Nick Griffin came on. I may betray a little bit of my political inclination here when I describe him as a fat weasel. And engaged in light badinage with the other people on the panel. They took him on an idea level, and they trashed him. They absolutely destroyed him because his ideas were immature, ill thought out, straightforwardly wrong, and poorly articulated. Well, that's not a great start. Add to that the fact that he was up against people that were several times his intellectual superior, and he was destroyed. And that was the day the BNP died. We should be doing a lot more of that. We should not be attempting to exclude ideas from discussion. We should embrace ideas. We should embrace the risk. We should accept the fact that all risk is about something you want to do. You take a risk because you want to do something. It's not about not doing something you don't want to do. You accept the risk, you embrace the risk, you assess the risk, and if it falls within your risk appetite, you go for it. And you have to dare to fail. And this came up this morning as well. You have to accept the fact that sometimes it won't work. Mostly if you're smart, mostly if you've assessed the risk properly, mostly if you've made sure you at least understand what you don't know. It's not important that you know exactly what the context is. It's important that you understand what you don't know, where you might be mistaken, where a fact may or may not be reliable. And then you can start making some smart decisions. So if that's my message today, it's very simple. Let's embrace the risk. Let's embrace the risk of bringing some openness and some truth into the public discourse. Let's embrace the risk of actually talking to people. Let's embrace the risk of bringing ideas out. I don't mean by that we should be offensive. I mean, political correctness originally was not about stifling ideas. It was about stifling the way we present the ideas in a way that's not offensive. Some ideas will be offensive. Some things are offensive. Some people are offensive. I can be bloody offensive. I was in the army for 25 years, Being offended is not a sufficiently good reason for not listening to what somebody's saying. So, that's my message. Thank you very much.